Hello there, you're watching the press preview, a first look at what is on the front pages as they arrive. It's time to see what is making the headlines with political commentator Adam Bolton and comment editor at The Telegraph, Annabel Denham. They'll be with me from now until just before midnight. So let's see what is on some of those front pages. And after the court ruling to stop a hotel in Essex being used to house asylum seekers, the Eye says that a number of Labour councils are now also planning legal action over hotels in their areas. That story is also the main item in tomorrow's Guardian. Likewise, The Times as well. Labour councils explore migrant hotel legal action is their headline. The Mail, meanwhile, calls it a Labour revolt. The problems all that creates for the Prime Minister and his asylum policy highlighted in The Sun with this headline, no vacancies. Meanwhile, in the FT, the jump in the UK inflation to its highest since January last year is the lead, which also points to the widening prices gap with countries in the Eurozone. That's at around 2% there. The Express warns of more misery for consumers over energy bills, with big rises expected later this year, despite government efforts to cut them. The trial of 68-year-old Christopher Brain, a former priest found guilty of 17 counts of indecent assault and still awaiting verdicts on 5 other charges, including rape, is the top story in tomorrow's Metro. The Telegraph looks ahead to tomorrow's GCSE results, with the Education Secretary telling the paper that failure to ensure that white working-class children succeed is holding the country back. And finally, The Star says the country is suffering from Oasis blues after the emotional high of the band's recent tour. So welcome now to Adam Bolton and Annabel Denham. Good to see you both. I don't know if you're suffering from the Oasis blues. We may never find out, because we're going to start, Adam, with the front page of The Sun. In fact, many of the papers, most of them, in fact, are focusing on this migrant hotels issue in The Sun's headline, no vacancies.
Yeah, and also above that, it's got Prime Minister's asylum nightmare. And this really is a nightmare for the government now, because it's become a very salient issue following that ruling in the courts yesterday that in Epping Forest, in the Bell Hotel, they've got 28 days to move the migrants elsewhere. Immediate problem for the government. No one knows where elsewhere is. We've seen ministers on television today unable to answer that question. Sir Keir Starmer, that no vacancies headline, reminding that he told a select committee at one point that he thought there were plenty of places migrants could go. But again, when asked, give us some details, he couldn't come up with an answer. And what the government is now worried about, as it also says on the front of The Sun, that local other councils are now considering going to court to see if they can get migrants kicked out of hotels in their areas, and that includes 2 Labour councils, the Wirral, which interestingly is the patch of the Immigration Minister Angela Eagle, and also the Tamworth, a classic marginal. And of course, the point is that these councillors do have to stand for election, and undoubtedly in saying my local electors don't want these people in hotels in my patch, they're probably absolutely right. Yeah,
interestingly, if we move on to the Eye as well, their front page focuses specifically on the Labour element of this. Labour councils threaten new legal action over asylum seeker hotels, is what the Eye says, Annabel. Look, it's one thing, Reform urging its councils to do whatever is within their power. People would expect that. But Labour councils, elections or not doing this, is an added problem for the government, isn't it?
This will certainly tighten the screws on Keir Starmer, on the government, yes, but I do think it was inevitable that they would be looking to their own interests and how on earth they're going to neutralise the reform threat. Farage now controlling some 12 councils across the country. So, of course, it isn't just those 2 from Labour, but others as well. And one wonders just how far this ripple effect may now spread, because ultimately, which council wouldn't want to bring a case where they're given the opportunity to do so, given the threat of local protests against these asylum hotels, which are often placed in town centres. They can really feel like they're the beating heart of some communities, which are now being packed full of often undocumented, unvetted young men. Now, Epping, of course, was a unique case because you did have that charge of sexual assault against an asylum seeker there, which we haven't seen in other asylum hotels, other councils up and down the country. But nevertheless, it does appear to be in some councils' best interest.
And we got Kemi Badenoch piling on the agony, embargoed till this evening. She's encouraging Tory councils to fight asylum hotels. I'm writing to you to tell you how Epping achieved this victory for their community and to tell you that we back you to take similar action to protect your community. Now, you know, she's leader of the opposition. She might consider this fair game, although, of course, it's worth remembering that actually more people were put into more hotels by the last Conservative government, and actually Labour have been reducing the numbers, although they're still tens of thousands.
I mean, 32,000 people currently across around 200 hotels. And the question, as Adam says, is where are they going to be put? And no government minister seems able to answer that question. Now, there is the possibility that you could put them into some unused housing, social housing, but that will, you know, if you think people are upset about asylum hotels, well, we've got a housing crisis in this country. If you start filling what vacant properties there are with asylum seekers, then that will cause a lot of public discontent.
But there are many more asylum seekers who are not in hotels. They're being housed somewhere.
Yeah, it's about a third, I think, are in hotels.
Yeah.
But, you know, we did have, before the summer recess, we had a lot of people complaining about homes of multiple occupation in areas of the country, groups of young men or individual young men amounting to groups being put into these communities, and those communities weren't happy either.
Yeah.
And then, you know, if we go back still further, when the idea was to use military camps, again, we had a lot of public discontent about the fact that you know, in the Dover area, that people were being put in their area. So, you know, it's very, very unclear what can be done about this. Labour's answer is they're just going to drive down the numbers, and by the end of this Parliament, which is another 3.5 years, they say they won't have people in hotels.
I imagine for Yvette Cooper, 2029 is currently feeling like a very long way away.
Yes.
I mean, the only thing she's got going for her is this quote, that the legal judgment was one narrow court judgment. That's what she describes it as, hoping that the specific, you know, circumstances will mean that others won't be able to follow.
Yes, could end up being the case. As you said, Annabelle, there were some specifics around the Epping case that other councils may find puts them off doing. You say, you know, would they bring it if they had the chance? I thought councils were strapped for cash. It's not cheap bringing a legal challenge to something, is it?
No, and one imagines that the more of these cases that are taken to the High Court, the longer it will take for them to get a ruling.
Yes.
And what happens
Courts
in the interim period. And there's a very real risk that there's going to be a lot of unrest that might be stoked as a consequence of councils bringing forward those cases, but actually they're not going to get any response anytime soon. So potentially some backlash there.
The Guardian focuses on the Labour elements of this as well, but let's whiz past that one and move to the FT with a slightly different story. Unexpected acceleration, Annabelle, in inflation. Why, they say they focus on it widening the gap with Eurozone peers. So inflation for last month ticking up to 3.8%. Airfares and the rising cost of certain foods, especially the likes of beef, going up by a quarter in a year is eye-watering. But the FT focused on the fact that in the Eurozone, inflation is hovering around about 2% on average. I think 1.8% in France, 1.7% in Italy. They're doing something which you would assume means imports will be cheaper. And we heard from a strawberry farmer just in the 10 o'clock news there saying we're going to have to pass on costs.
No, that's right. So 1.8 percentage point gap between the UK and Euro area inflation. It does look as though the Eurozone has been able to tame this much better than the UK, where, you know, it's 3.8%, nearly double the Bank of England's target. And yet just a couple of weeks ago, the Monetary Policy Committee made that decision to lower interest rates to 4%. Now, you have to wonder whether Andrew Paley and the rest of the team there are wondering whether that was a wise decision and whether perhaps they brought it down a little bit too quickly. But, to answer your question, why is inflation so sticky here? Well, it's in large part a consequence of government policy. It's the fact that, we've got wage growth as a consequence of the rise in the minimum wage that was brought in by the Labour government. You've got price growth, which is in part the result of rising staff bills after employer national insurance was increased in April following the October budget. So there are deliberate policy decisions which have been made which have perhaps led to inflation remaining higher here than in other countries.
Worth saying that perhaps, when you make the comparison to Eurozone countries, worth remembering that Germany has been formally in recession, whereas we haven't been formally in recession.
Yeah.
And as we keep on being reminded, the UK has had the highest growth in the G7. And that's the problem. If you stimulate the economy with things like increasing the minimum wage, then that's probably going to drive inflation. So, there is an element of swings and roundabouts, but it's certainly not good news. No,
and some of those policy measures you mentioned, Annabelle, the government's saying, well, they're trying to raise money that way. And your own paper, its headline is Reeves eyes tax raid on pension lump sums. I think this time last night, the front pages were focusing on a potential mansion tax on houses being sold for more than £1.5 million. Tonight on the Telegraph, Annabelle, looking at pension lump sums. Quick word on that.
Well, you have to wonder with all this tax kite flying whether the government is just laying the groundwork so when Reeves does raise them again in her October budget, having previously said that she wouldn't need to, the public are perhaps slightly desensitised to it and there's less of a backlash.
Pitch rolling is what you're talking
exactly.
about.
But at the moment, pensioners can withdraw as a quarter of their pot tax-free on retirement with a cap. But the Treasury is now looking at reducing that in order to raise billions of pounds. But as you say, we've also had the suggestion there might be some sort of mansion tax and further crackdown on inheritance tax. The big issue for Rachel Reeves is that Labour ultimately, with that manifesto tax triple lock, not to raise income tax, national insurance or VAT, has left itself with very little wriggle room. Where is it going to go next? Because we did see that £25 billion increase in employers' national insurance at the last budget. So they haven't got much wiggle room here. And yet it does look as though they're confronting an enormous black hole. There was one estimate last couple of weeks ago that suggested it could be as big as £50 billion. So they've got to try and find the money from somewhere, all the while hoping, praying for more growth. That's going to be very difficult if the Bank of England is holding interest rates higher.
Those pesky black holes, they don't go away, do they? Thanks both for the time being. Coming up, among the stories we'll be discussing this on the front of The Guardian. Israel says it will expand its Gaza offensive.
We arrive. A secret hospital hidden in the Myanmar jungle, treating the victims of this bloody war. This is Myanmar today. Its military rulers don't want the world to see, but we have.
I fight for my own future. I fight for my generation's future.
This is an actual crime.
They don't care for that.
Myanmar army is only a couple of kilometers away. So this is a major humanitarian disaster.
A lifeline for millions of people living on both sides of one of the most volatile international borders.
It's dams like these that have become inflection points between the two nuclear-armed neighbors, which could potentially lead to water wars in the future. A terror attack has shattered the peace and tranquility of Kashmir. At least 26 people have been killed and as many injured when militants fired upon them. I'm Neville Lazarus and I'm Sky's reporter based in Delhi.
The old and young, all weary after being trapped for days as the worst floods have hit Kerala in a century.
3 days we are on a rooftop. They have no food, nothing.
The roads have been inundated. The only way out is to get people by boat. There have been reported deaths and many injuries, several critical.
Many families will grapple with the unimaginable loss of one of the worst disasters in India's aviation history.
The spiraling violence between two nuclear-armed neighbors that harbor decades of hostility just seems to be getting worse
by the day. Garbage dumps like this not only threaten the lives of millions of people, but also pose a deadly consequence on the environment and climate.
It is a source of death, decay, disease and pollution for hundreds of thousands of people living in its shadows.
There is so much disease because of this garbage. Sometimes it's so difficult to just breathe.
Companies like these are helping India in its trajectory to be a serious player in space exploration. Over the next 45 days, an estimated 400 million Hindu pilgrims are expected to converge here in Prayagraj on the banks of the holy river Ganga and Yamuna. It's a real kaleidoscope of people from all walks of life.
Hear that whistle and that crunch? We know that they're coming from the south of the city where there's a column of Russian armoury.
I'm Alex Crawford and I'm Sky's special correspondent based in Istanbul.
Look at that sheet of flames, and that has happened within minutes, and now it's coming from both sides and it's moving this way.
Our app gives you the very best of Sky News wherever you are. Breaking news, videos, analysis, up at 6%. Podcasts, watching us live.
Joins us live.
All in one place, and all at just the touch of a screen. The Sky News app. Get the full story first.
Welcome back. You're watching the press preview here on Sky News. With me in the studio, political commentator Adam Bolton and comment editor of The Telegraph, Annabelle Denham. Let's delve straight back into the front pages. Let's start with The Guardian, this part, Adam. And Israel says it will expand its Gaza City offensive. We heard earlier in the evening Benjamin Netanyahu wanting to speed things up. We don't know from what to what, because some of these reservists being called up are being asked to report next month. But what is The Guardian saying about it?
Well, The Guardian is really confirming that it's happening because it's been talked about, but now we've actually had the Defence Ministry, their spokesman, Effie Defrin, saying that the call-up is taking place. Now, this is a call-up of 60,000 reservists, and the idea is they will fill in while the regular Israeli forces go into... And the phrase they're using is conquer Gaza City. And of course, they've already been trying to move people out into concentrated camps from that area. Now, this is an expression of determination by the government led by Netanyahu. As we know from the demonstrations at the weekend, it is by no means universally shared by the Israeli population. And, you know, the question will be, what happens to the hostages? Because a lot of people in Israel think the priority should be to get the hostages out. Netanyahu is in the process of rejecting the latest offer coming from Hamas to release some and go forward. So it just looks like the war goes on and the hostages will continue to be collateral damage. And of course, underlying all this is the fact that here we are nearly 3 years in.
Yeah.
And the massive forces of the Israeli Defense Forces and, you know, nearly 100,000 people dead, of whom the majority are civilians. And Hamas is still there. Hamas is still there, still calling the shots. And that objective stated right at the beginning by the Israelis of eliminating Hamas, it just hasn't happened.
Yeah.
I think that's a really important point, Adam, because in so many ways the IDF has been remarkably impressive and it has allowed Israel to reshape aspects of the Middle East. I mean, it's defanged Hezbollah to the north, the Houthis, and launched those very targeted, effective strikes on Iran. And yet in Gaza, it seems unable to achieve its ultimate military objectives of rooting out Hamas and returning those hostages. And you know, the ceasefire earlier this week, the terms that Hamas were willing to agree to of that partial return of hostages is simply not something that Israel would be able to countenance. So on it goes. 1.2 million people believed to be in Gaza City, already most of it reduced to glass and rubble. And you just wonder what will happen to the humanitarian crisis catastrophe that's underway there.
And the other thing they did say today from the Defence Ministry, or the War Ministry effectively, was they expect this operation, this aspect of Operation Gideon's Chariot, as they call it, to go on into next year.
Yes.
So it's going to be a very long...
Yeah, it certainly doesn't seem like it's going to end anytime soon, like you say, despite that offer of a ceasefire via Qatar and Egypt on behalf of Hamas. It looks like, as you say, we're hearing from the Israeli government that they are pressing ahead with this. Thanks both for the time being. We'll return to the papers after the top of the hour. But first, let's take a very quick look at the weather.
Breathtaking views with clear skies ahead. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
The next couple of days will be sunnier than we've seen recently, but it will be quite cool overall, especially in the east of the country. The bank holiday weekend, though, does look a little bit warmer when it arrives. Before then, there'll be a dry start tomorrow with sunny spells for most, but it will be quite cool in rural parts of the north and the west. Southeast England and North Sea coastal areas will keep a chilly wind. The morning will stay dry with bright or sunny spells, best in the southwest. It'll be rather cool again, chilly near England's still windy east coast, but eastern Scotland will see the wind easing off. By the afternoon, it'll bring a little overall change, although it will look a bit sunnier later on.
Breathtaking views with clear skies ahead. Qatar Airways sponsors the weather.
You're watching Sky News. Coming up next at 11 o'clock, the latest on councils across England. Several of them preparing legal challenges to asylum seeker hotels in their areas. You're watching Sky News. Don't go away.
I'm David Blevins, and I'm Sky's Senior Ireland Correspondent. I've spent 30 years reporting the journey from conflict to peace. The end of the political stalemate, the start of a new chapter for Northern Ireland. Catholics and Protestants now facing the same threat.
If we both contract COVID-19, religion's nothing.
Sky News, the full story first.